The year is 2011, and developer Riot Games has a bit of a problem. Their new title, League of Legends, is picking up steam and has the potential to grow into a gigantic success, but there's one major issue threatening it: stagnation. See, League of Legends is a MOBA game, a new genre born out of the Warcraft 3 mod Defense of the Ancients, or simply Dota. Most Dota-style games released up until this point, like Heroes of Newerth or Dota 2, aim to capture the original Dota's charm by essentially being carbon copies of the mod. Their goal is to just update graphics, introduce dedicated matchmaking, and create other basic features that the original custom map can never have. But League of Legends is trying to do something different. What's making Riot Games and League stand out is a willingness to change the format. League is adding new mechanics the original Dota never had, like a brush system that changes how vision works, summoner spells giving new abilities to all players, plus a new rune and mastery system which allows you to customize your playstyle in ways that other MOBAs don't let you do. Riot has even gone so far as to give every player a free teleport back to base called a recall, which many Dota veterans see as horrible casual nonsense. But these changes are making League of Legends slightly more popular than its competitors. This innovation is clearly something that players want. The only problem is Riot's starting to run out of ideas. In particular, the champion design team tasked with adding new characters to the game is understaffed and starting to release champions that feel a little too formulaic. A new character is added to the game every 2 weeks at the moment, but with each new addition, champions are starting to look more and more similar. Every new character seems to have a Q ability that just deals extra damage, a W ability that's some sort of shield, and an E ability that provides some sort of utility like crowd control or a team buff. If Riot doesn't get more creative with this area of the game and start introducing some new ideas soon, they might see League fail before it reaches its full potential. So to solve this problem, they went out and hired an intern. This new employee had no previous game design experience. He's never worked in the gaming industry before and is completely unproven in every sense of the word, but Riot gave him an opportunity anyway, and that decision would give League of Legends some of its craziest and most creative champions for years and years to come. This is the story of CertainlyT. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's video is once again sponsored by Ridge, the incredibly small, lightweight, and durable wallet. Personally speaking, I care about comfort maybe more than anything when it comes to my wardrobe, and the Ridge is honestly the most comfortable wallet I've ever carried around. It holds up to 12 cards, all your cash, and is super lightweight while also being surprisingly durable and way smaller than pretty much all other wallets. It's also a true buy-it-for-life type item, as it comes with a lifetime guarantee, which is something I always like. I mean, this can literally be the last wallet you ever buy if you want. If you want to go get one for yourself or as a gift for someone this holiday season, as it makes a pretty great gift, you can go to ridge.com/gbay99 and get 10% off your order, free worldwide shipping, and free returns if you're somehow unsatisfied. Just make sure to use code gbay99 at checkout. Thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. If you guys want to give them a look, a link is in the description down below. Bradford Wenbon, otherwise known as CertainlyT, was that intern Riot hired to help fill out the staff on the champion design team. As I mentioned, he had never worked in gaming before, as he went to college at Georgetown University, earning a degree in international political economy. He worked an eclectic number of jobs before this, including on a number of political campaigns, as well as for a tutoring company designing curriculum for students. But this new job would be the one that trumped all others in terms of its challenges and rewards. CertainlyT was first turned on to game design when he ran into a rioter at a social event one evening, where after talking a bit about gaming and some of the games CertainlyT enjoyed in particular, that designer suggested that he apply to the company. CertainlyT didn't take the offer too seriously and never applied until he ran into that designer again, who insisted that he could be a really good fit for the team. After applying for the position, CertainlyT would be given a phone interview where, after hearing a bit more about the problem-solving aspects of analyzing a game and how to approach making changes, he immediately became more captivated and was thrilled when Riot decided to hire him. Although he was just an intern, Riot would give CertainlyT a full workload, going so far as to trust him to design a new champion who we all now know today as Darius. Now, before Darius, the state of champion design was in a much different place. With almost every new release, Riot went in with a philosophy of trying to make sure champion abilities and kits were very flexible, that they allowed a player to mold a character to their own playstyle. For instance, AD carries were oftentimes given escapes, which allowed them to be played in a very passive or defensive way for players that wanted to use them to try and scale up for late game, but these escapes were almost always given some sort of damage or offensive element to their ability, meaning that other players could still use them in a more aggressive way. Each character was meant to provide tools that could allow a player to use them in their own unique way. But Darius threw all that out the window. For CertainlyT's first design, he wasn't going to have his champion be a jack of all trades. He would be good at one thing and one thing only, dealing damage. Darius was odd compared to some of the other League champions in that he didn't have any sort of defensive playstyle. You couldn't play Darius passively. There was only one way to use him: try to kill everybody before they kill you. Not only did CertainlyT spearhead a massive shift in tone on this very first project, but he also created tons of completely new mechanics that he threw into this kit. For instance, Darius's passive was a damage over time spell that stacked, dealing more damage to an enemy the more auto attacks and abilities that landed on them, and also had a bonus movement speed buff to Darius based on how many champions the passive was currently active on. That's all just in his passive before we even reach any main abilities. To put in perspective how crazy that was, you know the last new top laner released before Darius? That was Fiora, pre-rework Fiora, who was famously one of the worst champions in game. You know what her passive was? Each auto attack you landed on a champion gave you a little bit of health regen. That was it. The biggest new mechanic CertainlyT introduced when designing Darius had to be his ultimate, an execute ability that would fully reset its cooldown for each enemy killed with it, but to be honest, Darius's entire kit was a sight to behold. Up until this point in League's history, he could have very well been the most creative champion added to game, and on release, the community hated him. When Darius came out, he was famously overpowered, with it being pretty easy for new players to pick up the champion and stomp every match. There were some problems with his kit that you could say were simply oversights compared to what we have today, like when Darius got a kill with his old ultimate, it would come off cooldown forever, meaning that you could solo kill someone in lane, and by the time they go through the death process and walk back to lane, your ulti is still gonna be up, ready to solo kill them again. But Darius wasn't just a strong champion. Some people believe that he was fundamentally broken. Back in Season 1, there was a YouTuber named CertainlyT who was a bit of an authority on informative League of Legends content. He made high-quality videos breaking down the mechanics of how to play League, in addition to writing an entire ebook that taught people the game, which he regularly updated for a number of years. CertainlyT was even considered so knowledgeable that he would eventually get a job as a developer on the tablet MOBA Vainglory, which is a pretty big hit in the world of mobile gaming today. On Darius's release, CertainlyT put up a YouTube video showing off his first pentakill with the champion, where in the description he wrote a few of his thoughts on the character's design. These paragraphs began with a pretty damning, somewhat prophetic quote: "What was Riot thinking? This champion is not balanced, not a good addition to the game, and not fun for anyone other than the player currently using him." That ethos would follow CertainlyT around for the rest of his career, as he'd be known as the guy who made really fun champions to play, but characters who were a bit frustrating to play against, to say the least. Years later, in an interview with Travis Gafford, he would articulate what he thought his role was as someone introducing new characters to the game.
What the purpose of a new champion in the game is, right? It's to shake things up and like force you to basically learn a lot of new things in order to succeed, right? You know, there are various models of like what fun means in a game, but to me, fun is a process of learning, seeing patterns in a complex system, and that is why humans enjoy playing games. And so I want new champions to be demanding, to put a burden on you to have to rethink how you play. If a champion is just a stand-in for another and you understand immediately how to beat it, to me, that's not really a new champion. I am aware that my job is to make something that will kill you and cause you to fail repeatedly until you learn how to deal with it. Obviously, some players are going to be upset by that, but yeah, I make stressful situations, and sometimes people get really stressed out and yell at me, and that's okay.
Although Darius had a somewhat rough release week, Riot really liked what they saw in his design and CertainlyT's work. He was creative, pushed the game forward, and innovated in ways that they hadn't ever seen before. So after the character came out, they would hire CertainlyT as a full-time employee for the champion design team. This was followed by CertainlyT going on a streak of creating one new champion after another, where each was more creative and outlandish than the last. It all started with two support champions. His next projects would be Zyra and Thresh, two new bot laners who could create new ways to interact with the lane based around more new mechanics. For Zyra, it was her plant mechanic that allowed her to exert pressure in unusual ways, whereas Thresh was given the ability to manipulate enemy and ally positions with unusual crowd controls, as well as his W Dark Passage. These characters were interesting in that they weren't just adding new mechanics to the game, but they were adding new ways to play the game. CertainlyT was clearly trying to add mechanics that would influence lane states and allow players to apply pressure in ways that no other characters could. You might love or hate some of these champions for how many mechanics they have in their kit, but it's hard to deny that they aren't skill-expressive characters that have given us some of the most exciting and hype moments from early League history.
Wansuck again getting caught a bit. How does he hit every single one?
Following these supports, CertainlyT would get even more creative in his designs by creating Yasuo next. Yasuo was a champion who every one of his abilities brought a new mechanic to the game that changed how League was played. He's someone infamous for being frustrating to face if you're up against a talented Yasuo player who knows what he's doing, but he still had that skill expression in his kit, and it took a large amount of practice to reach that level of talent. If you haven't put in the time and effort with him, you can easily find yourself failing with the character. Following Yasuo, CertainlyT would continue with his foot down on the gas pedal, potentially breaking his own limits when it came to creative design and innovative characters with his next project, as he would be the lead designer that then pioneered Kalista. As most of you already know, one of the core mechanics in League of Legends is auto-attack canceling. When auto-attacking, almost every champion has the ability to cancel the ending animation of their auto-attacks to slip in short movements, allowing them to kite or chase opponents. Well, every champion can except for one, Kalista, who has a completely unique mechanic where she has to finish her auto-attack animation, but then gets to hop a set distance at the end of it. This means she might start off a game slow and sluggish, but by the end of a match, a skilled player can use her in some really creative ways with crazy movement. Many of these champions continued being too strong on release, as Darius was, which drew ire from League's fan base, but these characters were all really fun, and oftentimes still had a fair bit of counterplay that just took a little longer to learn compared to the average champion. Riot absolutely liked CertainlyT's work, as after Kalista, they would then assign him to rework some of League's older characters, maybe because their need to be updated was partly his fault. Caitlyn, Graves, and Warwick would all be given reworks spearheaded by CertainlyT, which these are oftentimes considered the gold standard for champion updates. Comparing the state of these characters where they were on their initial release to where they are today is a very stark contrast. Every one of these kits is more dynamic, with more creative ways to play as or against them, while still keeping true to the original themes of their pre-rework visions. The introduction of all these new mechanics, in retrospect, was absolutely a net positive for League. I mean, some people may complain about how frustrating it is to face a good Yasuo or how Kalista is never balanced, but the introduction of these champions certainly kept League feeling fresh over the years, if nothing else, and helped to further distinguish it from its MOBA competitors. Riot was probably encouraging CertainlyT to continue pushing the envelope further and further over the years with each new character, which he always delivered on, although things might have gotten a little bit too crazy after that. After he released Callista, the next new champion CertainlyT would work on would be a burst mage, meant to be a bubbly, cute character initially called the Mirror Mage, but eventually renamed to Zoe. And Zoe was maybe the most frustrating new addition to League up until that point. She had all the classic trimmings of a CertainlyT character as he introduced more new mechanics on every ability. Her Q was a redirectable skill shot that dealt more damage the further it traveled. Her W stole enemy summoner spells. Her E was a new sleep crowd control that also brought a new skill shot idea where the spell traveled further if it passed through terrain, and her ultimate was just a little blink back and forth with a cooldown no longer than 10 seconds. On paper, she didn't seem like anything too different than just another new innovative champion. This time the gimmick was that almost all the character's damage was within a single ability, her Q, but some fans noticed that she was strikingly similar to an old strategy League had that was previously removed from the game. Nidalee, who was at one point played as a full AP champion and had an eerily similar tactic popular throughout seasons 2 and 3. She was someone whose Q had AP magic damage that scaled based on how far her ability traveled before hitting someone, and if you built her full AP, this spell dealt insane damage. This was way worse than any AP Nidalee build you might see today, as her spears could literally one-shot players. Riot gave Nidalee a small rework to remove this strategy from the game for a number of reasons. They didn't just not like the spears, but she also had unfair levels of healing with this build, as well as really great mobility, making her hard to pin down. But what everyone remembers her for are those crazy one-shots. In Nidalee's rework, some of the damage would be taken away from her Q, and instead she'd be buffed in other ways with more utility or damage on other abilities, but that rework made it seem as though Riot opposed that style of play, although Zoe would bring it right back into the game. She has that same mechanic of all her damage being in a single ability that can literally one-shot squishier characters, except in some ways you could argue she might be worse. Old AP Nidalee at least had the option for players facing her to just dodge spears if they're good enough, but Zoe has a crowd control that can make her Q undodgeable. At this point, people were starting to get a little worried that maybe CertainlyT's champions were getting a bit too crazy about just being fun for the player of said champion and not having enough counterplay for opponents they faced. We'd continue seeing discussion surrounding this as CertainlyT would then go on to rework 2 more champions, Akali and Mordekaiser. These reworks again introduced new mechanics to the game that could be really fun for a player to use, but further exacerbated that idea that CertainlyT champions were really unfun to play against, maybe now more so than ever with having such a limited counterplay. Well, the next character he made would kind of leave us with more questions than answers. I want to copyright the moon was the headline surrounding Aphelios and his release, a new CertainlyT champion that would be unlike any other. As an AD carry, Aphelios wouldn't have normal abilities or a normal UI, rather he would have 5 different weapons where each had a different passive and active ability that Aphelios could swap between and which could be comboed with an ultimate in different ways. This was a kit that really felt like a CertainlyT character in that it gave you the impression you had to take a college course on understanding how to play against him. On release though, Aphelios was somehow simultaneously both kind of easy for players to take advantage of, letting them get some pretty insane kills.
Is one free kill waiting for me, Mr. Jin?
While at the same time, it was still incredibly difficult to tell what was going on for anyone playing against him or watching his game, including professional League of Legends commentators.
4 off on the other front, they turn onto the 3, the flash forward, Vista is point blank range with the close range weaponry, and my god, is it difficult to cast Aphelios, but it's easy to see how good he is.
What was maybe even more incredible was the fact that CertainlyT wanted to do even more with the champion than what was released. In particular, he wanted to make the character's power level increase or decrease based on the real life cycles of the moon. So that meant if you were playing Aphelios on a full moon, he would be considerably better than if it was just a half moon, or if you picked him on a new moon, he would be all but useless. Honestly, I don't want to commentate too much on him in determining whether he was a success or not, since he's a relatively new release and we're still reeling from his abilities, trying to understand his kit to some degree. I'm sure plenty of people would call his kit a failure or describe plenty of issues with it, while others might think that he does have counterplay and it just takes some time getting used to, like all CertainlyT champions do. It's easy to get caught up in the hate for these characters on release, and I understand the ire that some people have for CertainlyT and his work, but honestly, the more and more I think about his characters, the happier I am that he's made these additions to the game. When there's discussions around a CertainlyT champion, it's always about how insane their kit is, or what sort of outplays you made with them, or how frustrated you were when an enemy used them to outplay you, which isn't always the case for every new champion we see added to the game. Just look at Seraphine, a character introduced to League by having a personal Instagram and Twitter account. She's someone who kind of feels like she was created more so for a K-pop KDA promotion rather than to be an actual League of Legends champion. Her kit has a theme so bland, everyone immediately recognized it as being a near carbon copy of Sona, to a point where I haven't heard one thing about how she feels to play. There's no discussion around her gameplay whatsoever, just how much people love or hate her personality and promotional style. You might love or hate a CertainlyT character, but you have to admit, he never made champions whose promotions outshone their abilities. His releases were some of the most insane additions to the game, but they kept ensuing discussion around the gameplay and pushed League forward in ways that nobody else could ever dream of. At time of recording, CertainlyT is currently listed as a senior game designer on Riot's research and development team, working on a new project, likely one of the many new titles Riot has planned for the future. I'm not sure if that means that he's done with champion design for good, or maybe not, but if he is gone, then honestly, I'm a little bit sad about it. His willingness to push the envelope of League's characters is something that I'll sorely miss. It's what made League stand out from the many Dota clones of the early 2010s, and what continued to give us some of the most exciting, crazy highlights of the late 2010s. He really has a talent for coming up with unique ideas, and even if he is gone from League, his influence will always be felt in-game for years and years to come.
Games are in many ways a microcosm of life, right? They allow you to experience a lot of different situations in a space that's safe and isolated from external consequences. And so I actually think that, maybe this sounds unintuitive to people, but that like in some ways like negative emotions within the game are an important part of what a game can be. That sometimes you should be frustrated, sometimes you should feel down or beaten in a game. Not only does that heighten the elation of victory or triumph, but it also just teaches you to deal with those things. And as you learn to discipline yourself and overcome it, like you've done something that a game offers people. Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing about Riot that stands out to me is that there's seldom an area where like there's like some high-level mandate that's coming down. Things are more organic than I observe in other studios or other professions. And so what that means is that we get a lot of creative ideas, but we also like make some mistakes. Maybe you feel my champions are an example of that. The process as a whole is designed to, in the long run, produce a more compelling play experience, but sometimes we'll stumble or err. And I think that's natural, and so I'd encourage you to look at the direction of change, the arc of history when it comes to League, rather than a few specific things that you happen to like or dislike.